On October 14, 1969, the editor of the San Francisco Chronicle received a long letter. It was not the first of its kind, nor the last, but it sent a particular shiver of fear through families in the Bay Area. It began, "This is the Zodiac speaking," and concluded, "School children make nice targets. I think I shall wipe out a school bus some morning, just shoot out the front tire, then pick off the kiddies as they come bouncing out." This was a clear and chilling threat that the man already known as the Zodiac Killer was about to widen the range of his targets. Over nearly 3 years, the targets had been young women, often together with their male companions. Originally, the first had seemed a single random victim, and it was many months before the police suspected that her death marked the beginning of an accelerating series of murders. On the evening of October 30th, 1966, Cherie Jo Bates, an 18-year-old freshman at Riverside City College near Los Angeles, left the campus library to discover that her parked car would not start. She did not know, but the distributor had been disconnected. Someone, presumably a man, approached her and probably offered her a ride. He dragged her into some nearby bushes, kicked her in the head, stabbed her twice in the chest, and slashed her throat so viciously that she was almost decapitated. A few days later, the police received a letter. It was a blurred carbon copy of a document typed all in capitals, and therefore impossible to trace back to its source. It gave details of Cherie Jo's murder that only the police and the killer knew. It began, "She was young and beautiful, but now she is battered and dead. She is not the first, and she will not be the last." After a detailed description of the killing, the writer admitted, "I am not sick, I am insane. But that will not stop the game." 6 months after Cherie Jo's death, the local Riverside Press Enterprise published an article on the unsolved murder. The following day, the newspaper, the police, and the girl's father received identical crudely penciled notes on lined loose-leaf paper. Bates had to die. There will be more. Each was signed with what could have been a figure 2 or a small letter Z. More than 18 months passed. On the evening of December 20th, 1968, David Faraday, 17, and Betalou Jensen, 16, attended a end-of-term concert in their high school at Vallejo, on the north side of the San Francisco Bay Area. After the concert, David suggested that they should drive up to Lake Herman Reservoir to look at the view over Vallejo. As the teenagers sat kissing, they were suddenly illuminated by the narrow beam of a flashlight. The driver's door was wrenched open, and David was shot point blank in the head. Betalou was able to run just 10 yards before she was gunned, down with 5 shots in the back from a .22 automatic pistol. A few minutes later, a passing motorist spotted Betalou's body and raced off in search of a patrol car. When the police reached the scene of the attack, Betalou was dead. David was still alive and able to give brief details of the shooting, but not of his attacker, and he died shortly after reaching hospital. The police were stymied. There were no witnesses and no apparent motive. Neither victim had been robbed, and Betalou had not been sexually assaulted. Just over 6 months later, on July 4th, 1969, Mrs. Darlene Ferrin, 22, had a date with 19-year-old Michael Mago, one of a number of boyfriends she hoped her husband wouldn't find out about. They drove out of Vallejo together and parked at Blue Rock Springs, a local beauty spot only 2 miles from where David and Betty Lou had been killed. On the way, they had been followed by another car, which now parked only a few feet away. Darlene seemed to know the other driver and reassured Michael, saying, "Don't worry about it." However, 10 minutes later, a blinding white spotlight shone in on them from the other car. Without a word, a man appeared in the dark and started shooting. Darlene was hit 9 times and died soon afterwards. Michael took a bullet in the neck, which shattered his jaw and ripped away part of his tongue. Other shots hit him in the leg, elbow, and shoulder. The gunman left him for dead, but he survived and was able to give police details of the attack and even a partial description of the killer. Within an hour of the shooting, Vallejo PD received a call from a payphone. A man speaking softly and without an accent told them, "I want to report a double murder. If you will go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway to the public park, you will find kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye." The police traced the call to a booth in front of the Vallejo Sheriff's Office and within sight of the house where Darlene lived with her husband Dean. A passerby had noticed a stocky man using the phone at the critical time, but this was the only clue the police had. Suspicion naturally fell upon Dean Farron, but he had a cast-iron alibi for the time of the shooting. Discussing the murder later, several of Darlene's friends recalled that she had received anonymous telephone calls in the preceding weeks and threatening visits from a heavyset man she referred to as Paul. On one occasion, she told her babysitter, "He doesn't want anyone to know what I saw him do. I saw him murder someone." The police could only add the killing to a list of unsolved murders. Apart from the telephone call, they had no evidence to connect the shooting of Betty Lou Jensen with that of Darlene Farron. But everything changed on the 1st of August when the editors of the Vallejo Times-Herald, the San Francisco Examiner, and the San Francisco Chronicle each received a letter. The letters were signed with a cross over a circle, presumably intended to be a sign of the Zodiac, although also significantly similar to a gun sight, and were crudely written and carelessly spelt. The letter received by the Chronicle began, "Dear Editor, this is the murderer of the 2 teenagers last Christmases at Lake Herman, the girl on the 4th of July near the golf course in Vallejo. To prove I killed them, I shall state some facts which only I, the police, know. The details the ammunition used and the position of the bodies made it clear that the writer must indeed be the killer." Each newspaper also received 1/3 of a message in cipher, a sheet of random symbols with no overt meaning. The murderer's letters concluded, "I want you to print this cipher on the front page of your paper. In this cipher is my identity. If you do not print this cipher by the afternoon of Fry, 1st of August 69, I will go on a kill rampage Fry. Night. I will cruise around all weekend, killing lone people in the night, then move on to kill again, until I end up with 12 people over the weekend." The 3 newspapers published their separate parts, while the police sought the help of Naval Intelligence, the CIA, and the National Security Agency. Not one of these highly experienced organizations was able to break the code, probably because it was so unsophisticated. Donald Hardin, a high school teacher in Salinas, and his wife cracked it in a day and a half. Each third of the message consisted of 8 lines of 17 symbols each, and it was written in a simple substitution cipher. On the 7th of August, the killer wrote again, for the first time identifying himself by his nickname. He gave many details about the Vallejo killings, explaining that he had been able to aim his gun accurately by taping a pencil flashlight to the barrel. But although he wrote that when the police cracked, "I'm going to the code they would have him," the deciphered message contained no clue unless it was "have to stab" hidden in the final cluster of 19 apparently meaningless letters. Cipher experts concluded, "You people," that this was common practice to fill out a message to the desired length. But when the deciphered message was published on August 12th, amateurs from all over the Bay Area were sure that it was an anagram of the Zodiac's real name, the only plausible rearrangement, however, being Robert Emmett the Hippie, and no one answering that description could be found. The intervals between the murders was decreasing, and Zodiac struck again on September 27th. In the early evening, two students, 20-year-old Brian Hartnell and 22-year-old Cecilia Shepard, were picnicking by Lake Berryessa, 20 miles north of Vallejo. Out of the trees came a heavily built man, around 6 feet tall, wearing a black hooded cape like a medieval executioner. On its front was a white cross and circle. A long knife in a sheath hung at his left hip, and in his right hand he held a semi-automatic pistol, which was pointed directly at the couple. The man said he was an escaped convict from Deer Lodge, Montana, where he had killed a prison guard and needed Brian's car to get to Mexico. "I'm going to have to tie you up, he said, producing several lengths of clothesline. When they were both bound and lying face down on the ground, he said, "I'm going to have to stab you people," and began stabbing Brian repeatedly in the back. The young man, unable to move, decided that the wisest action was to pretend to be dying. But the assailant then turned to Cecilia and began to stab her over and over again. Finally, he walked to the car and wrote a message on the door with a black felt-tip pen. A little over an hour after the attack, the Napa Sheriff's Office received a phone call, later traced to a pay booth in Napa. "I want to report a murder, no, a double murder," said a quiet voice. "I'm the one that did it." At the crime scene, the investigating detective found the message on the car door. There was a crude drawing of male genitals with the customary Zodiac symbol and the words, "Vallejo, December 20th, 68, July 4th, 69, September 27th, 69-6.30, by knife." They were the dates of 3 Zodiac killings, and they were coming closer together. Cecilia died the following afternoon, but Brian survived. 2 weeks later, on October 11th, a San Francisco cab driver, Paul Stein, was killed with a 9mm pistol, and ballistics tests showed that it was the same gun used to kill David Faraday and Betta Lowe Jensen. The killer had wiped the interior of the car with a piece of fabric torn from the victim's shirt. It was 3 days after the killing that the Chronicle received a chilling letter beginning, "This is the Zodiac speaking. I am the murderer of the taxi driver." It concluded with the threat to shoot children on a school bus and contained a piece of the cloth torn from Stein's shirt. In the Napa Valley area, thousands of children rode daily in school buses, many along deserted country roads. Urgent instructions were issued to all school bus drivers. In the event of an attack, they were to continue driving, even on flat tires with all lights on and sounding the horn, and they were not to stop until they reached a well-populated area where police officers could be notified. Fortunately, the Zodiac did not carry out his threat. The police issued a composite-based image, see page 83, during this stage of the investigation. At the time, the case was being headed up by State Attorney General Thomas Lynch in an effort to pick up the Zodiac's trail before he killed again. Then a startling development came in the early hours of October 22nd. A man telephoned the police in Oakland. "This is the Zodiac speaking. I want to get in touch with F. Lee Bailey. If you can't come up with Bailey, I'll settle for Mel Belly. I want one or the other to appear on the Channel 7 talk show. I'll make contact by telephone." Belly, one of America's most famous lawyers, agreed to appear on the show the next day. At 7:40 a.m., a man called into the radio station. He had a long conversation with Belly about the murders and said he suffered from blinding headaches. He ended by agreeing to meet the lawyer in front of a store in Daly City, but predictably, he failed to turn up. The police, already convinced that the call was a hoax, eventually traced the caller to Napa State Hospital, where he was a mental patient and certainly not the Zodiac. In the second week of November, the Chronicle received 2 communications from the Zodiac, one of which was a commercially printed greeting card. One side had the printed words, "Sorry I haven't written, but I just washed my pen." Inside was a Zodiac ciphertext, together with the scrawled message, "And I can't do a thing with it." This, the Zodiac speaking. "I thought you would need a good laugh before you hear the bad news. You won't get news for a while yet. P.S. Could you print this new cipher on your front page? I get awfully lonely when I'm ignored. So lonely, I could do my thing. Dec July Aug. Sept October 7th. There were 2 killings unaccounted for in August, when a couple of girls aged 14 and 15 had been found frenziedly stabbed, but the police were far from sure that these could be attributed to the Zodiac. In fact, the true killer was traced 2 years later. The second letter mailed to the Chronicle was 7 pages long. In a diatribe against the police, the Zodiac wrote how he would never be caught, leaving no fingerprints. "The police shall never catch me because I have been too clever for them. I wear transparent fingertip guards. All it takes is 2 coats of airplane cement." He then threatened to bomb a bus and included a sketch of the construction of the bomb and a plan of how it would be laid. Nothing more was heard of the Zodiac for some weeks. Then Melvin Belly received a Christmas card with another scrap of Paul Stein's blood-stained shirt. The full-page message inside wished him a happy Christmas and continued, "The one thing I ask of you is this: please help me. I cannot reach out for help because of this thing in me won't let me. I am finding it extremely difficult to hold it in check. I am afraid I will lose control again and take my 9th, possible 10th victim." On March 15th and 17, 1970, a man in a white Chevrolet was reported following women motorists and trying to make them stop. On March 22nd, Mrs. Kathleen Johns and her 10-month-old daughter were offered a lift to a service station near Modesto by a man who told her that the rear wheel on her car was loose. Instead, he drove her away through a maze of winding lanes, calmly remarking every now and then, "You know I'm going to kill you." By mistake, the man drove onto the exit ramp of a freeway, and as he stopped, Mrs. Johns gathered up her daughter, jumped from the car, and took terrified refuge in an irrigation ditch. When she later reached a police station and gave a description of her abductor, She spotted an artist's portrait of the Zodiac on a wanted poster and cried out, "That's him right there." When her car was recovered, the interior had been completely burned out. 9 more letters were received from the Zodiac between April 1970 and March 1971, and there were several unsolved killings during this time, but the police were confident that at least one was a copycat crime. In the first of these letters, the Zodiac claimed the following about his 10th victim. "It would have been a lot more except that my bus bomb was a dud." Journalists and the police continued to receive Zodiac letters, but most were judged to be hoaxes. However, unsolved murders continued in the Bay Area, and in January 1974, the Chronicle received a letter that was considered genuine. It ended with the score, Me 37 SFPD 0. Then, nothing for 4 years, until on April 25th, 1978, a letter arrived at the Chronicle with the chilling words, "I am back with you." The police speculated that the killer might have been in prison or even being treated in a mental institution. Significantly, the letter ended, "I am now in control of all things." After that, there were no more Zodiac murders.